If you've been told to pull up your socks, then make sure it's a pair of TNT socks. The TNT shop is now open at tntradio.live. You're listening to Jerm Warfare with Jeremy now on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Jerm Warfare at tntradio.live. That's my email address. As always, thank you for the emails that I do receive. And as always, let me know where in the world you are. Got a mail here from Mats Jansson, I think his full name is, from Sweden. Just saying how much he loves my show, is asking me questions about whether or not I have bought too much into the, how does he put it, the anti-China propaganda. In other words, is it possible that the anti-China, hold on, let me get my wording right here. Is it possible that the pro-China propaganda is just as bad as the anti-China propaganda? That's an interesting question. What I will say is this in response, and very quickly, I do not believe anymore what comes out of the mainstream, particularly the Western machine. I think it is just far too corrupted with agendas and deep state nonsense. I have no reason to think that China is this great evil that I have been told my whole life. It makes absolutely zero sense. So, in reference to the conversation with Carl Czar, I don't in any way think that he is talking nonsense. I think that if it comes out of the mainstream, it's most likely nonsense. And I think we need to take ideas from people like Nassim Taleb, who wrote, a good collection of books, but the one that I liked the most, what was it called now? I seem to have forgotten. I think it's... Oh, it doesn't really matter, but the message that I got from the book that I read of his is that you should put more faith or put more trust into those with more to lose. And I think the mainstream media have got very little to lose. They are seriously, seriously well-funded. And I think we should rather put more faith and more trust into those people who have more truthful, perhaps, stories to tell from whether it's China, Iran, Russia, doesn't really matter. Anyway, let me jump to my guest. My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas.
Your home for the news.
They do a great job of breaking down the big story.
Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right. Alex is just quickly looking for my guest. It looks as though we just lost her temporarily. But I was just saying now before that sweeper that I am more inclined to consider that what I see in the independent media, the alternative media, is more trustworthy than what I see in the mainstream or the corporate media. I don't buy into the anti-China propaganda anymore. I really don't. I don't buy into the anti-Iran propaganda. All you ever see in the mainstream news is how bad China is, and something has to say to you that this is not right. How can China always constantly be the demon, the devil? It just doesn't make sense. There are millions of Chinese tourists everywhere. They are the world's second largest economy. If it was absolutely so terrible, so oppressive, so totalitarian, you can't possibly make the argument that the amount of innovation going on there is because of totalitarianism. All right, Alex says that Cynthia is back. Cynthia Chung, can you hear me?
Hi.
Hey, there we go.
My internet is not very reliable where I live.
It's funny you should say that because I live in South Africa, so I should be the one saying that, not you.
I know. Canada, we pay like the most for internet, and yet it's still really unreliable. I don't know what to say.
I love it when somebody like me on the African continent wins.
Yeah, no,
we win it so little.
Everyone I've talked to in Africa has better internet connection than we do in Canada.
I was rambling on a little bit there about China. And I know that you yourself are Chinese.
Yeah, I'm half Chinese.
So you agree with what I'm saying, that there is just too much anti-China propaganda?
Yes. To the point where they're trying to justify a war. Yeah, it's pretty over the top.
I'm trying to find a segue, but I can't. So I'm just going to jump straight into your article about about limits to growth, because it's really, really, really interesting. So let's start here. When we talk about limits to growth, what are we talking about?
Well, right now it's a common conception that we live in a world that is governed by zero sum. Hence also the need for war with China. And we live in a world of limited resources. And so we are kind of destined to have warfare over these things until I guess at some point maybe we will have a victor, who knows. But there's also this idea that we live in an entropic system, which is a closed system, the universe we live in, the planet. And thus we are an unnatural entity that has been somehow created where we have the capability to basically supersede what is normally the plateau limit for any other species that we know of that lives on the earth, where the plateau is that you're supposed to, as any kind of organism or animal in an ecosystem, you get to a certain population level, and then there's only so much resources that you consume in that ecosystem. Once you hit a certain number in population, the resources won't be able to sustain your population, and there's a natural, quote unquote, natural curbing of that population. And so the human species is the only one where we don't really hit a plateau, because we have creative innovation. And we've been doing innovations in all fields, including, very importantly, agriculture, which has allowed us to continuously push that plateau limit to a higher level. And then we have another innovation, and it's again another higher level for the plateau. We keep pushing it upwards, and so we've been now told, especially since the advent of the Malthusian theory or doctrine or religion or dogma or whatever you want to call it, because it's not really science. They've been imposing that we are unnatural because we are not obeying what other species tend to do on Earth, but they also still try to project that ultimately we will hit a plateau. That's the Malthusian idea, is that ultimately we will hit a carrying capacity, because there is still only so much resources in the world that we live in. And so I did a presentation, an article, basically addressing this fallacy.
That Malthusian catastrophe, let me just get this right. That's the intersection between human population and food production, and that's when that's the hypothesis is when human population outgrows the food production capabilities. Is that right?
Yeah, he was specifically looking at food in his model. Yeah.
Well, clearly that hasn't happened.
Well, that's the thing. He made his prediction that in 1790 that we would hit our population crisis limit in 1890, and that didn't happen. But unfortunately, he was the reason for enforcing a lot of really bad policies to curb the human population, where people were, denied medical treatment. Families that had more than, a certain acceptable number of children within a few years, those children would not be given any kind of state provision or anything like that. And he said that, these children really didn't have that much worth, and that they would be easily replaced anyway. So there was clearly also an ideology of or a philosophy of what defines human nature that's attached to this way of thinking, where you ultimately are thinking of people as like a form of animal that can just easily be replaced, like if they were on a farm. And there isn't really an idea of the sacredness of the individual, or what an individual can actually do to benefit a society that is not just labor-based. And unfortunately, even though we live in a world where we don't have as much of that kind of stark kind of situation of labor, we still have an outlook that is still kind of generally like that you just, you work until you retire and you work a basic job, and that's pretty much it in terms of a contribution to society, instead of a kind of creative contribution where we can be encouraged to be problem solvers. We can really change the situation that we live in for the better. But that kind of way of thinking has been increasingly discouraged. I would say also the reason why these kinds of predictions, because Malthus is very much connected to the limits to growth doctrine that came out from the Club of Rome, which actually was adopted by the World Economic Forum their second year after they were their founding. So this is very much at the head of the policy, the world policy outlook of the World Economic Forum, is to regard people in this kind of light. And these kinds of predictions, they're never accurate because, as I was saying, humans innovate. So you can't make a linear projection into the future and then think that that's going to be accurate to something that is also qualitatively changing. Because when we have an innovation, our relationship to the resource changes as well. So the resource now can actually become like a certain amount of that resource can now generate whatever we need for a lot longer, or the kinds of things we did in agriculture where we turned, watermelon and peach and, banana and all of these things into something that was edible and that could last you a lot longer than what was naturally provided in nature. So that's really, I think, a conscious thing that has been enforced on people's thinking today, that to think of ourselves as not only unnatural in our existence on Earth, but to kind of discourage this idea that we are actually creative, we're a creative species that innovates, so we don't have to be worried about these kinds of linear projections. They don't apply to us. And it's not bad for the Earth because we can actually make changes to the environment. If we'll probably have time to go through some examples, which actually not just benefits us, but it also benefits the surrounding environment. It's not like, we're a parasite, which is how we're normally portrayed.
We're portrayed as useless eaters, which is a term that I've also heard bandied about. Tell you what, let's jump into those examples. But before we do that, I'm just quickly going to go to a break and then we can do it. So my name is Jerm, chatting to Cynthia Chung. This is TNT Radio.
You should hear what David McBride and Dr. Robert Brennan are talking about.
This is specifically with regard to defamation, where Nine and other news networks had painted a pretty poor picture of Ben Roberts-Smith, and so he was taking them to court for defamation, and it doesn't have any criminal consequences.
Although there has been a lot of media coverage over the years, both leading up to the publication of the Berthman report and since then, and a lot of allegations have been aired, in the main, most of those allegations have not named a specific individual. What made these circumstances involving Ben Roberts-Smith and Nine a little bit different to that is that back in 2018, the Age newspaper, so Nick McKenzie and Chris Masters, who wrote for the Age newspaper, they named Ben Roberts-Smith, and they made very, very specific, very, very detailed and highly damaging allegations against Ben Roberts-Smith. They basically said, this individual is a war criminal, this is why, and they went into a lot of detail in a series of, I think there were 6 newspaper articles. That's where this case differs from some of the other media coverage of some of the other events that happened in around that period of time in Afghanistan.
McBride and Brennan with David McBride and Dr. Robert Brennan on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Affordable housing, we can build that. Sustainable housing, we can build that. At MIT Modular, we understand the importance of housing for all and the importance of design, cost, and functionality. Our goal is to meet the needs of our growing population by converting shipping containers to livable units. If you're like-minded and in a position to invest in something meaningful and life-changing, we want to hear from you. We are a team of professional architects, engineers, and financial and tax experts dedicated to offering unique solutions that provide a brighter future. Our Opportunity Zone Fund offers investors both real estate and operating business diversification, 5-year tax deferral on capital gains, annual tax benefits, and ultimately tax-free appreciation potential. There are opportunity zones all over America. If you're interested in learning more about our services, need affordable housing, or want to participate in creating a new vision for tomorrow, give us a call in the U.S. on 385-985-5702 or read more at mitmodular.com. MIT Modular. We can build that.
Hear about it?
I don't even know where to start with AOC.
Talk about it.
The stupidity of this administration.
On today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
Cynthia, how do they arrive at this calculation that there are too many humans?
Well, that's the thing. They use the Malthus model to say that at a certain point we're going to just reach our carrying capacity, and we've already superseded what was thought to be the plateau. Because if you look historically, Malthus wasn't the first person to say that we hit a population limit, and they like to just put these numbers out there. Like, David Suzuki, I think, has said ideally it should be a ridiculously low number. I think it might have been something like 200 million. But, they, even if it was 1 billion, that's like a drastically, a drastic reduction from where we're at. And they don't really justify how they've come up with this. I guess the closest thing you could say to something more specific was that when the Limits to Growth released their hypothesis or their theory as well, that we live in this world where we're ultimately going to consume everything in it if our population continues to grow and we don't do anything to curb it. That was published in 1972, the year after there was an Australian supercomputer that was able to calculate when the world would end, well, for humans anyway, depending on the different parameters you would enter into this computer. So again, that just tells you that the computer is not actually, reliable, because it's us humans that are entering the parameters. But they had several scenarios of like, maybe like the most ideal, that we have unlimited resources, we have pollution control, we have birth control, we have unlimited food, and still, this computer was always calculating that our species would go extinct before 2100. And of course, this computer has made, because it was in 1973, there's already been predictions that it made for 2020 that are completely wrong, such as, it was predicting that we wouldn't have any more chromium left, we wouldn't have a lot of metal reserves left. And in fact, the chromium reserves are like 2.5 charts higher than what they were projecting by this supercomputer. And the reason for that, again, is that we had innovation in mining, and we were able to actually find a lot more chromium and use chromium in a more efficient manner. And so that's just one example of how this supercomputer, again, with a linear, not just a linear projection, but these were estimates. These were estimates of what we had as resources to begin with, because we don't actually even know, how much chromium in the world do we have, and these kinds of questions. So it's very unscientific, and at the end of the day, it's very political to try to scare people to think that we do need to do things that are increasingly less humane. Because we have to. We have to because otherwise it's going to be a crisis for everybody, or it's going to be a crisis for the planet. And there has been no indication that this is the case. It's us voluntarily kind of putting ourselves back into the pig pen, so to speak, thinking that we have to do this, and we don't. So it's really, at the end of the day, to disempower people and to have a disempowered view of yourself. Because if you think that there's nothing positive about your existence, and the best thing you can do is to just limit your influence on anything, it's not a very positive outlook. But yeah, that's some of the points that I make in this paper. For instance, this idea that we have limited space. There's this excellent meme saying that you could actually fit the world. I'm not saying to have people this closely put together, but just to say how much space we have still on the planet. You could fit the entire human population into Texas, about 27,000 people per square mile, where you could have a 33-foot by 33-foot plot of land per person, which is enough to fit a townhouse for every person on the planet in Texas, which seems incredible. So that gives an indication of at least how much space we have. And I was looking up in terms of food production. World food production has actually been increasing despite political interventions to decrease that. So in the United States, I think that might be the only place in the world where it is kind of at a plateau right now, or maybe even might be decreasing. All other parts of the world, it is increasing, especially in Brazil and China. But in the United States, that's happening for clearly political reasons. And then in terms of agricultural land use, that also has been decreasing. So we're growing more food and we're using less land, because we're getting better at the techniques that we're using. So again, these are very positive statistics. And there's other examples, like in terms of what China and India, they're one of the most densely populated countries in the world. And if you look at, Shanghai, for instance, in China, or Beijing, these cities are actually, they're quite populated. Shanghai has 26 million people with a 6,000 square kilometers. But if you look at the city is actually quite beautiful. They have a Century Park, which looks about the same size as Central Park in New York, if not bigger. And Beijing, too, has done a lot. They're also planning on planting trees in between buildings and stuff as well, so it's not just concrete. And these are actually quite nice-looking cities at this point. Actually, China takes it very seriously to have these natural parks, like very well thought through parks throughout the cities in all of its provinces. They take it very seriously because it's just part of something China has been doing for centuries, and they take it very seriously to have a connection to nature. So those are just examples of how you can have densely populated cities that are still beautiful. They don't have to be the dystopic images that we're constantly being pumped with sci-fi Hollywood movies. That, again, Hollywood is definitely not a neutral industry. They do work ultimately for the same, I would say, kinds of people that you could say the World Economic Forum has as an outlook, and they again want to always encourage a very negative, cynical view of the future, because we're constantly told that we can't make anything better, only worse at this point. And lastly, before I let you maybe interject, China and India have also grown a massive amount of greenery, forest area in their countries. So if you look at a satellite map at this point, the greenest areas on Earth are North America and pretty much China and India at that point. And that was because of a completely man-made forests that they've done to deal with a lot of the desert area that these countries were dealing with. So again, China and India, one of the most populated countries in the world, with the most green in the world too, amongst the most green. So again, it just goes to show that we have a lot to work with.
So what seems to be the case, Cynthia, is that the longer we move into the timeline of the future, the slower all this supposed overpopulation happens. There seems to be a correlation between innovation and finding better ways to live.
Yes, and it's our natural tendency to want to do this. So actually what has been very unnatural is the enforcement to kind of deter from these kinds of innovations. And again, like if you're in the sciences, it's very political in the Western world in terms of like how you get your funding, how you get your investment. You have to have certain kinds of projects. And there are some projects that are purposefully killed, even though they have a lot of positivity to offer. And that also gets people very discouraged because they don't see any, positive innovations coming from the universities. And they again think that, well, that must be because we don't have very many options, which is not true. So, for instance, like the world's desert, 2/3 of the world is desert, but actually the Sahara Desert is about half of the world desert. And if you were to green the Sahara Desert, which used to be green, the Sahara Desert used to be a tropical region, but for some reason, I don't think we know why, all of the water went underground. So all of the water is just like underneath the Sahara Desert. We'll hopefully find a way to bring it back up. But anyway, there's other techniques of regreening it. And one of the things besides, you would cool, for people who believe that the world is getting hotter, this would decrease the temperature. It would address CO2 because you'd have more green to do that. You'd keep more water inland because you need the greenery to keep the water inland. But also, it would drastically reduce the number of hurricanes that hit the eastern coast of the United States, because most of the hurricane activity, and you can look it up on Wikipedia, the Atlantic hurricanes from 1953 to 2018, they have like this, they have like all of the hurricanes marked on a map. It's because all of the hot air that's moving over the Sahara is then cooled rapidly while it traverses the Atlantic Ocean, such that it turns into hurricane activity by the time it reaches the eastern coast of the United States, which has caused a lot of problems, obviously, for the United States. And so that is something that, the Sahara Desert was not caused by human, just to be clear, from human activity. I don't know if people, who knows, at this point, they try to blame human activity for everything. But this is an example of how human activity can actually address something like this, which is surprisingly a controversial thing for these more extreme-minded people, where they're anti-human impact. They basically say that there's nothing that humans can do to make the world better, even though there are clearly so many projects we can do to make things better. So that's like one very striking example for me anyway.
I'm looking at this map from your article of how green Earth is, and I mean, it's actually impressive at how much green there really is. I have to say though, Alex, who's in Australia, I think let's just take a moment in silence for poor Alex, because Australia is not very green. I mean, in fact, it's so far from green that it's more orange.
Yeah,
sorry, Alex.
A green strip. It's just a green strip on the eastern. But that's the thing with Australia. I think it's actually a heated topic because agriculture is really important for Australia. It's an important component of their economy. And imagine how much more bounty there could be if there was greening projects. But again, this is also very political in just doing greening, which you would think like that wouldn't be a problem. Actually, there's a funny story of a scientist in British Columbia, which is the west coast of Canada. It's a really beautiful place, like semi-tropical place to live in. And for the salmon farming, he wanted to help the situation out. And there was already an algae, availability in a certain area, and he ended up I think putting like copper pellets or whatever into the water, which, I mean, there's probably more to it, but it ended up really exploding the algae production there. So it became like an algae bonanza. And not only was the salmon population increased by like threefold or more, but it started to attract the ocean life from like quite far distances. So you had like, whales, and you had all sorts of things that were like migrating to feast on this algae farm. And the scientist was thinking like, he was so taken aback because he thought that everyone would be so happy at this discovery that he made, which obviously would have applications in numerous places in the ocean to again help with like any kind of ocean life to increase its numbers. And he was attacked for this because he intervened as a human, and there were some people, including Naomi Klein, who were upset that whales were like, migrating to this algae farm to eat at this algae farm, as if that somehow this was like a sickening thing for them, which they can't, I think, fully explain, except to say like, oh, well, what will happen, once that we stop doing that, then they will have been dependent or whatever. It's like, well, they came there because they didn't have algae in other, in other sections. So there's this weird idea that almost a religious belief that we cannot make things better, even when we obviously can.
I think that comes from the idea that we know there are internationalists who are quite Malthusian in their thinking, Cynthia. So they do want to control population, and so to reference, for example, Malthus. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he was quite keen on the idea of trying to encourage people basically not to have sex as a form of population growth, as well as other preventative measures. I think getting married late was another idea of his. And of course, I think he liked war and disease as a way of regulating population growth. I think you can correct me if I've got it wrong.
Yeah, no, for sure. But what I'm saying is like, why is it that the average person, right, has bought into this idea of themselves? Because it's not in their interest. I agree. It's in the interest of people who believe that they are above the common masses. But why have the so-called common masses bought into this idea of anti-human impact to the point where most of my family, most of my friends, they really believe that they have to live this way. And there's actually a lot of youth that are going through, like, I think this is the number one cause for depression almost amongst youth nowadays, is like the planet is going to burn up and we're going to destroy the planet. So it's really unfortunate that especially the youth generation is like totally bought into this. I remember visiting a university where I had a younger friend, and they actually had this like countdown clock of like how many days left we would have until like the earth would like burn up or something, like completely made up, you know, crap. But this was at the university. It's just this like countdown clock of like how many days we have left. It's really psychological warfare on these people, and it's become the new way of you know, kind of controlling people and keeping them in a box. And so, yeah, but I totally agree with you. It's a Malthusian outlook for the elites.
I'm going to quickly go to a break, Cynthia. So I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, just so that we can make it to the end of the show, please don't use any gas and turn off all your light bulbs, please. This is for the preservation of all of us. So please, you know, we need you to look after the planet and the population, Cynthia. So I'll be back with you in a moment. This is TNT Radio.
Nobody is safe until everybody is safe. Welcome to the dystopian world of COVID lockdowns.
From Washington, D.C., this is the Morano Minute with your host, TNT Radio's Mark Morano.
The corporate government collusion we all witnessed during COVID-19 is best encapsulated with the phrase, nobody is safe until everybody is safe. In fact, here is the corporate government messaging.
No one is safe.
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 Nobody's safe.
No one is safe.
Nobody is safe.
This is a post 9/11 axiom. Safer but not yet safe.
No one is safe. No one is safe. No one is safe. No one is safe from COVID-19 until everyone is safe.
If the whole world isn't safe, none of us are safe.
Whenever you hear government, corporations, academia, the ruling class all singing from the same hymn book, run, because your freedom is being crushed. Nobody is safe until we reject the Great Reset. This is Mark Morano for the Morano Minute on TNT Radio.
Good night, mirror. Good night, window. Good night, door. Good night, seat. Good night, seatbelt.
For thousands of women and children in Australia, their car is their home. Help make a real difference to their lives. Donate to the Vinnie's Winter Appeal at vinnies.org.au or call 13 18 12.
Good night, Mummy.
Germ warfare is Jeremy now on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
You were mentioning earlier, Cynthia, you wonder where this idea comes from that everybody, and I have the same thing in my circles. You know, we're overpopulated. We have to control everything and we have to reduce this and stop doing that. And it's so nihilistic. It's so black-pilled. It's so pointless, because what is then to enjoy? You live once, and as far as I can tell, the world is no worse than what it was 50 years ago.
No, and the thing, I mean, it's basically what they say to slaves. That's what they want their slaves to think, basically. You know, they want people to be in that kind of a disempowered view of themselves. And the thing that people have to realize is that you can use energy, first of all, in a way where you're not making the planet worse. We can use energy in responsible ways. We can prosper in ways that are not just because I think the age of consumerism and, you know, this encouragement of cheap labor and then throwing stuff away and not like keeping things, whereas the generations before, they made things to last. That was not a good thing. I'm not saying we should be like that kind of an extreme, but we should have good quality things. We should have a good quality life, and you can do that without being unnecessarily wasteful. And the thing people have to realize is that the reason why we have all of this is because energy in industry, building is a measure of how sovereign a country will be, but so is energy. So energy will decide how independent you are as a people, and it's also what defines the social progress index. So this is very important for any people who want to be empowered, basically. And the reality, the European Union, they're saying that they want to cut, fossil fuels by 50% or the carbon or whatever by 50% by 2030. This is an attack on the people, but they word it in this way to try to make it sound like they're doing it for everybody's good. But it's actually a clear just attack on people's welfare and saying that the World Economic Forum said you will have nothing, you will own nothing, and you will be happy. This is the doctrine. So fossil fuels, the reality of fossil fuels is that the world is still very much dependent on fossil fuels. They're not as harmful to the air as people say. There are EPA, measurements of the air quality. It's actually not a crisis at all. And nuclear is supposed to be the thing that we get increasingly into, which I'll go into quickly, but afterwards. But fossil fuels is what predominantly most of the world use. And the thing people are not told is that we have had actually a drastic reduction in world poverty over the last few decades because of fossil fuel use, because it's by far the cheapest, most efficient energy available. And before that, most of the poor countries in the world were using dung or wood to heat and cook their homes, which is very toxic to be breathing in. And, a lot of people that are jaded, that grew up in like these societies that already were affluent, they have no conception of what it means if you say you can't use fossil fuels. The dung and wood is not really a good alternative. And obviously you can't make the jump from dung and wood to nuclear. You have to have the fossil fuels as the intermediary. And that's where we really see the hypocrisy of this, because nuclear is a zero carbon emission. I mean, if you are to, take this line seriously anyway. And so why are they attacking nuclear? And they're acting like nuclear is somehow, unnatural and all this. We won't have time to go over it, but I do go over it in my paper, What Determines a Limit to Growth, that nuclear is actually, by far the most energy dense thing, very safe. It's the safest energy we have right now. If you look at any chart, it will tell you nuclear is the safest, safer than solar and wind and geothermal, all of these. And the thing is that they've tried to make it really, really difficult to even begin a nuclear plant because there's just so much safety checks and paperwork, which costs a lot of money. That's like unnecessarily high. And that's like one kind of a sneaky, slimy way of like trying to do this. But they're even just shutting down nuclear plants at this point. Germany is like, one of the most insane countries right now that have shut down their last 3 nuclear plants, if not already, even though they are completely energy dependent on all of the countries, outside of them, for the dirty energy sources like fossil fuels, but also nuclear from countries like France. So it's absolute hypocrisy, not even hypocrisy. It's just outright lying, saying that you can sustain your people on renewables when you are clearly not, and you're getting all of your energy from just other countries. And this is supposed to be the model for other countries to do the same thing. It's a suicide run. But I want to quickly mention that the future of nuclear, which again, fusion power should have happened. People have been told that it's always 30 years away or whatever, but the reality was that there was never any kind of serious investment or funding into it. China finally is actually doing something seriously to achieve nuclear fusion, and I think that's why, certain institutes like Lawrence Livermore is now trying to act like they're keeping up with China because they want to, it would be embarrassing for them. But the reality is that the Lawrence Livermore Institute works for the military-industrial complex. They only care really about this kind of research for applications in weapons systems, not for commercial use, whereas China is doing this research for commercial use. And if we have nuclear fusion, this has absolutely no waste. The waste situation with fission is actually not anywhere near bad either, by the way. But nuclear fusion is a completely clean energy. Also, you can't have a meltdown with nuclear fusion, and you can have the fusion torch. The plasma torch already exists, but the fusion torch can actually reduce things to their elemental components. So we can turn landfills now into resource mines. The way our relationship to waste will completely change, and we won't have to, even mine. So people who are maybe worried about mining in terms of like going into areas and messing it up, or even, deforestation or whatever, we have the capability now to break down things that we've already made and rebuild them up. And not only that, but into materials that are actually stronger. With the fusion torch, we can actually make a better kind of steel. We can make a better kind of titanium than we have currently with our kinds of energy use. And that's another thing people don't understand. Renewables, they are not able, they can provide electricity, but they cannot provide the other kinds of energies we need, including industrial processes. So renewables can't even make the materials that are required to build themselves. That's how absurd this idea of renewables is.
I've often joked about that. Show me a factory that makes solar, not solar panels, it doesn't matter, wind turbines, but that's also powered by wind turbines, and I haven't seen one yet.
Yeah, they're not able to. And the other really disingenuous thing is that solar panels are very toxic. And right now, there is no plan for what to do with the old solar panels. So there's going to be a crisis in pollution where we will have very toxic landfills of solar panels, which we don't have right now currently a solution for what to do with these things, because they're not easy to break down.
There's a comment in the live chat by Jake, and it's the usual trope. I'm sorry, Jake, but it's the same nonsense. It's the fear porn that you hear over and over about nuclear. Yes, it says, when just a small mistake happens, everything is gone for thousands of years. Cynthia, I'm going to suggest perhaps something that's maybe unpopular, and I'm going to say that the nuclear fear, I think, is completely overplayed. Chernobyl, for example, has got animal life and plant life that's flourishing. I mean, they've gone in with drones. I'm not saying I'm going to go into Chernobyl. I'm a bit too scared still, but I have a suspicion that we've completely overplayed this nuclear card.
Yeah, well, even if you go onto Wikipedia for Chernobyl, they say fewer than 100 deaths that were directly attributed to the accident. That's even what Wikipedia says. Fukushima, it was 16 physical injuries, and 2 workers were taken for radiation burns. That's from Wikipedia. And the thing that they claim for these disasters is actually, again, another linear projection model, which is the LNT model. Linear non-threshold. And again, for those who want a more detailed explanation, they can see my paper, What Determines the Limit to Growth. But to give you a quick example, we can use, instead of radiation, vodka. So if you have 1 bottle of vodka, let's say you have a 50% chance of dying if you drink this in 5 minutes. So according to the LNT model, if you have 2 people finishing 2 bottles of vodka in 5 minutes, you'll have 1 death. So if you have now 10 people who finish 2 bottles of vodka in 5 minutes, you will have 1 death. If you have 100 people who drink 2 bottles of vodka within 5 minutes, you will have 1 death. So you understand how that logic doesn't make any sense. for vodka. That is the same logic that they're using for radiation, which is obviously totally useless as a way to measure radiation on health. And that is how they're measuring it, is through this LNT model. So that's bunk. For people who want to know more, Pandora's Promise is a really great documentary that goes over this. And they actually took a Geiger counter that measures radiation levels. And they went to Chernobyl. Just to give you an idea, by the way, the Brazilian beach had 30.99 millisieverts as the radiation measure. Normally, the background for like Los Angeles, New York, or Tokyo was around 0.09, 0.13. 0.09, 0.13. Brazilian beach, 30.99 millisieverts.
Sure.
And this is a healing beach. People will cover themselves in the sand of this beach. Now, Chernobyl, they measured it for 3.67 millisieverts. A town near Chernobyl was 0.91 millisieverts. Fukushima was 0.18 millisieverts. And they were right by a nuclear waste storage container that was 0.7 millisieverts. So again, it just goes to show you, like, why are hot springs and these like healing beaches so high in radiation, but then we're scared of 3.67 millisieverts at the Chernobyl site. It doesn't make any sense. And obviously, people are not properly educated on what exactly radiation is, and that it's actually important that we have a background radiation. And it's been shown through hot springs and these Brazilian beaches and so forth that radiation can actually be very healing for us. So we have to kind of rearrange how we're thinking about our relationship to radiation. Radiation is not something just poisonous and toxic at any kind of level. It's actually something that is essential to all living life on Earth. So nuclear has actually got a terrific safety record, and the I think it was called the 1,000 Mile Island fiasco too. That was found to be sabotage. So we're not. There has not been the number of deaths that have been justified through the LNT model. It's been used as an excuse because nuclear, again, as I was explaining, energy determines your level of sovereignty, your level of empowerment. They clearly want to even take away fossil fuels. So, of course, they don't want nuclear. Nuclear is even more energy dense, even more useful for people. If you had enough nuclear, just a few nuclear plants, it's enough to power huge cities. It's a game changer for what is possible for the economy, for science driver projects, for industry. And that's where really we're told we can't do that anymore. That's really the situation. Or if people want to have another idea, 50 million bananas is equivalent to a lethal radiation dose of 5 million microsieverts. Okay, so if you were told 5 million microsieverts was dumped into the ocean as radiation versus 50 million bananas, you understand, right? Now, our idea of radiation is not exactly accurate.
Cynthia, sorry, time is very, very fast running out. I'm going to invite you back because there's a lot more I want to chat to you about. But for now, I'll give you 30 seconds. How can I follow your work?
The best way is to follow me on my Substack page, cynthiachung.substack.com, Through a Glass Darkly, or the Rising Tide Foundation, risingtidefoundation.net, which is a nonprofit that myself and my husband, Matthew Arrett, have started. It's a East-West educational platform, focuses on culture, history, and science.
All right. I'm really going to invite you back. I've thoroughly enjoyed chatting to you. But for now, Cynthia Chung, thank you for joining me in the trenches.
Thanks so much, Jeremy.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. And thank you, Alex, for for helping me sort out a couple of gremlins throughout the show. But everything has worked out fine in the end. I just want to say again, Alex, I feel sorry for you. After I saw that map, Australia looks terrible. It's like yellow-orange, while most of the world is sort of greenish. All right. Send me an email, jermwarfare@tntradio.live. As always, let me know where in the world you are mailing me from. Up next is Steve Hook. My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas.